Welcome back to the WorryFree Retirement. We are talking about the many C's to a worry-free retirement. And we're going to start naming these, and then we're going to get into some detail. And we were talking about this in our marketing meeting before we went on air. This is probably going to cover about 3 different shows to cover all of these C's and to go into detail to help you worry less about money. But let's clarify what we've got there, and that is clarify. You know, when you're starting off working with anybody, you have to clarify your vision. We're going to talk about that more in a second. Number 2 is consider. Consider what you've got and what you're trying to accomplish. The other C is concession. Now, what I mean by that is, in order to get something, a lot of times you're going to have to be willing to give up something. That's the other C. Here's another one, create. You know, over the years, I've learned that most people don't have a game plan. They have nothing anybody's created for them that they can properly monitor as they get into retirement. We'll be talking about creating. Control. Boy, this is a big one. I mean, let's face it. If you don't have a lot of control in your life, let's take the stock market, for instance. If things just seem to be out of control, I can assure you, you will worry about the future. And then the next one, the final one, is just simply confidence. So confidence is that ability to know what's going to happen in the future, or at least have an idea of what is going to happen and feel more confidence about it. And since I was never really formally trained in things, years ago, let's go to our first step. Aaron's over at the helm here, and that is clarifying your vision. So I stumbled across this gentleman by the name of Brian Tracy. He's a well-known motivational speaker and author. And what I did was I trucked off to San Diego once a quarter for an entire year to meet with he and about 50 other people around the country and actually the globe in a program called Focal Point, because I wanted to learn how to help others clarify their vision and also how to better set up goals for their future so you could be successful. I wasn't ever trained in that. So with Mr. Tracy's help, and this was some valuable information, let's go over what he taught me about setting goals. Now, number 1, the first problem people make when setting goals is they never write them down. Folks, if you want to accomplish anything in life, there is something powerful, something almost magical about setting up a goal and then writing it down. I have things I've written down for years and I've kept them, and it's weird how a lot of those things I wrote down, eventually they come to pass. It's a really cool thing. But if you're going to accomplish anything in life, you've got to write it down. Now, second thing with setting goals, they have to be realistic. Let's face it, let's say you're age 60 and you got $5,000 in the bank and you're hoping Social Security will get you by and you got a $200,000 mortgage and credit card debt. Well, to think you're going to retire next year, that wouldn't be realistic, okay? The third thing you have to do in setting goals is put it on a reasonable timeline. You know, I'm one of those types, I work better on deadlines. I like timelines, but those timelines have to be reasonable. For instance, the last person I just mentioned, it isn't that they can't retire next year, they probably can't, but they need to be more reasonable. Maybe that timeline is age 65 or 67. So again, when you're setting up goals, set up a timeline, and again, make sure the timeline is reasonable. And finally, this is a biggie. Find someone that you can hold yourself accountable to. You know, one of the things I like doing in this business is when I meet with people, they know they've got somebody that cares for them and they're going to have to be accountable to. We are trying to work on this plan together, and it's good to have somebody in your corner that knows what the heck they're doing. So this is why the first step of our process is called clarify your vision. You know what I've learned over the years is before we go to these other steps in the worry-free retirement process, I want to make sure that I know how you're wired, what you're doing, and where in the world we're trying to take you. As the old saying goes, folks, it's hard to know where you're going if you don't know how to get there. So what is it we're even considering? Well, seeing as though we all have different worries, different goals, you know, God didn't wire us all the same. As your planner, if you decide to hire me, I must remind you to consider your situation now and what might come up in the future that can get in the way of these goals that we've set in motion. For instance, if you're considering retiring next year and all you have is $20,000 in your 401k, again, you might want to consider the fact that you might have to work longer. Here's another example. Let's say you're 62 and you got over $1 million in your 401k and you're thinking you can retire, but you forgot to consider, okay, the amount of taxes you're going to owe on that 401k when you drag it out. Well, you might have to reconsider things. So there is a lot to consider when thinking about retirement. Now, As Will Rogers once said, I love this quote, he said, always assume the worst and you'll never be disappointed. When people were meeting with me, and especially if they're shopping around for an advisor, this really confuses them. But when they meet with me to go over their game plan, we almost never, ever consider using an assumption, that's the rate of return we're going to grow your money at more than 3%. And you'd say, well, Tony, that's ridiculous. Hasn't the stock market done 10, 20? Well, we've actually performed that well on some of our portfolios, folks, but we're trying to do planning here for savers. What we want to consider is not these high-flying stock market returns that may not always happen. We want to consider something called worst-case scenario. So if the stock market's imploding, if rates of return are down or inflation is high, cost of living on Social Security continues, etc., we want to use worst-case scenario. We want to assume things will not always go well. That way, as Will Rogers said, you're not going to be disappointed. Okay, as promised, I was going to deal with this one thing, inflation. There's a few things you can do to combat inflation. In the essence of time, let's go through these very quickly, Aaron. So the first thing you can do is remember front door, back door. Now, what do I mean by that? Folks, always think of your air conditioning in your home, all right? Running the air conditioner is expensive. If you leave that back door open and the bills keep racking up and you leave the front door open, what comes in the front, the hot air, is going to push that back air right back, that hot cold air right out the back door, and it's going to cost you money. You got to shore things up with your finances. Remember, if there's not enough coming in the front door, income, and the expenses are too great going out the back door, again, expenses, you're going to run into trouble. So we can help you close those doors up, all right? You got to do that. The second thing to remember is dollar in your pocket. Now, this throws people off, but let me assure you, folks, you may have $1 million in your 401k plan, but if that thing's in the stock market, you've got risk, you've got taxes, inflation, I can tell you this, $1 in your pocket is worth more than $1 tomorrow, every time. That's number two. Number three, been there, done that. Folks, ever since the Fed kind of entered the fray and got rid of the gold standard in 1933, inflation is nothing new, and I know it's high right now, but the way to beat inflation is not trying to chase after all these returns and put your money at risk. The way to deal with inflation are the things we're talking about on this show today and for the next several weeks. Remember, the reality of life, it's going to play itself out. That's what we call the three halves of life. So the three halves of life says that as you get older, and I've seen this play out in our clients all the time, you're going to spend less and less money. Number 5, Aaron, let's take a look at that. Can't take it with you. Well, this is the live well, die broke philosophy. Folks, even the Bible attests to this. What you bring into this world, you can't take out with you. So why not take on this philosophy of figuring out a way to find someone like us that can help you use and enjoy this money while you still can. I think we got another one up here, don't we, Aaron? Give now versus later. We're having more and more clients understand the value of giving money to kids and grandkids now rather than the old school method of waiting till you croak. And then I think we got one more, Aaron. He's nodding yes. Yep, understand the difference between gross and net. Now, I got to go over this because here's the situation before we put up Granddad's paycheck, Aaron. You've got to understand something. You think you're making all this money. You know, you make $100,000 a year. Well, folks, that's your gross. After all the deductions come out, you don't have much left. Now, let's go back to Granddad's day. Look at Granddad's paycheck. This was my grandfather at Bell South. This is hilarious. This was back in the 60s. There was his gross amount, but look at his net amount as a percentage of his income. Well, the reason is he didn't have any deductions hardly, just a few piddly taxes and things like that. So Granddad, when he retired, listened closely, and began to draw his mailbox money, he didn't have that much difference to work with, and his net and gross was about the same when he retired. Not so for you. Let's look at the modern day paycheck. Ouch, looks like a sushi menu. Look at all the gross, the deductions. Look at that. That net is over $2,000 of deductions. It's less than half. So many of you have all these deductions coming out. You're afraid to retire or even to think about retirement. You have to understand when you meet with a trained retirement specialist like us, I'm going to be able to sit down and help you understand that the net in your pocket when you retire is going to look totally different from this. So if you're sitting there saying, Tony, I just don't think there's any way I can retire, I would encourage you to contact us to make sure you're not thinking of gross and net incorrectly, because when you retire, gross and net changes drastically.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed that video. If you'd like, check out these other clips. And be sure to hit that like button and that subscribe button for more videos.